Welcome, everybody. Last year, if you were here, you might remember that I made the bold decision not to wear a sport coat. I wore a tie, but I didn't have a sport coat on. It was a bold decision. Look where it got me. Today we're here to talk about three things: added fat in finisher diets, soybean meal levels, as Mike alluded to, the price is coming down, and then some DDGs by tryptophan research that some of the grad students have been involved in. First of all, Jenna Brahm's data for her master's project looked at adding fat from 0, 1, and 3%, or feeding no added fat up to about 210, 220 pounds, then feeding 300 or 100 pound, 3% fat in that very last phase. And you can see we saw a nice response to added fat. Surprisingly, we got a little bit higher than expected bump with the 0-3% program. But again, you see a nice response to added fat. Looking at feed efficiency, this was more what we expected, a nice improvement in feed efficiency, and that 0 to 3% pretty much intermediate in terms of the response to feed efficiency. But when we looked at market weight, we went from 283 to 285, 200 and almost 86, and 287 pounds. I want you to remember the final weights of these pigs. They'll come back into play in a little bit. Jenna also conducted an experiment looking at, again, control levels with no added fat, 1 or 3% choice white grease, 1 or 3% corn oil. And just like what we saw before, we saw a nice improvement in average daily gain with increasing either fat source. We saw improvements in feed efficiency with increasing fat. Again, just like what you'd expect in terms of improvements, going down to almost 0.2 of an improvement in feed efficiency, either with the choice white grease or pigs fed corn oil. And when we look at their final weight, we picked up about 2 pounds, 2 to 3 pounds with the 1% added fat, and a little bit closer to 6 pounds with the 3% added fat. So this comes into play when we look at iodine value, that when we fed the corn oil, as you'd expect, higher iodine values with an unsaturated fat source versus lower iodine values with the saturated fat source, choice white grease. And so again, there may be economic opportunities, probably not as much now with the Renewable Fuels Act, but corn oil may be, in some cases, maybe be economical, but again, from a carcass characteristic standpoint, probably not work out in terms of the program. And so what Jenna did was to look at the scenario of a high feed cost, low revenue situation, and if we look at experiment 1, the revenue decreased as we increased the added fat in the diet and resulting in a decrease in income over feed costs. Same thing in experiment 2, maybe not quite as dramatic, at least with the 1% level, about the same, but again seen, as Mike pointed out, decreased income over feed costs when we feed higher levels of added fat. Now, some people help me out with this slide that they don't need to be named, Jordan, but this is the random distribution of a population of pigs weighing 270 pounds. Because quite often people will say, well, it might not price in quite economically on just growth performance or feed efficiency, but what about bringing the lightweight pigs up to hit ideal market weights? And that's what this slide addresses, because we're talking about the lower end of the growth curve or the market weight curve. Can we move those pigs up enough to justify paying for the added fat? And so what that boils down is to opportunity costs, that as we reach ideal market weight at about 275 pounds, we lower the opportunity costs, compared to 250 pounds, where there's about a $4 per pig opportunity cost. And so with the numeric increases in weight gain, will that push more pigs into the ideal market weight? And with an average population, moving this percentage of pigs up would create $10,000, almost $11,000 worth of opportunity revenue. If we bump the population 3 pounds, which is what we were seeing with the 1 to 3% added fat, we'd generate $9,000 because we're moving more of these pigs upwards, would generate $9,000, or a difference of $1,800 in terms of opportunity costs. And if we say we're evaluating 1,000 pigs, that's about $1.88 per pig. And so the value gained in opportunity costs captured must offset the 1 to 3% added fat. And so again, looking at fat prices in the 70 to 80 cent range, to offset the $3 to $5 per pig increase in feed costs, really even taking into account moving more pigs into the ideal weight range generally isn't going to help. And it depends on a lot of factors, depends on your market weight. If you're short on time and you're marketing pigs lighter, that may have a greater opportunity. But if you're already hitting market weights at 285, 290 pounds average market weight, there may not be as much opportunity. And so looking at things from a growth performance, from a feed efficiency, and then the concept of moving some of those pigs up a notch in terms of market weight. Want to share results of a soybean meal project Jamil was involved in, and thank the United Soybean Board for their support. But as you know, renewable fuels, tremendous demand for soybean oil. Soybean crush plants are expected to increase by 25% over the next year or two. The prognosticators indicate that we're going to have very inexpensive soybean meal. And so we wanted to look at going back to things, whether feeding high soybean meal-based diets were going to negatively affect performance. Getting too much protein in the diet, too much soybean meal, would that influence things? And so Jamil's study at the home farm looked at 19 to 34% soybean meal, and we actually saw a linear improvement in terms of average daily gain. Whereas when we did the study in the field, again, 18 to 34%, we saw no response to increasing soybean meal. So again, telling us that we won't have any problems if soybean meal becomes so inexpensive that we start to maximize its usage. Again, like average daily gain, we saw an improvement in feed efficiency with increasing levels of soybean meal in our home farm with no DDGs, but when we fed DDGs in the diet, we saw no improvement in terms of feed efficiency. And so this begs the question, are we seeing the feed efficiency response due to increased energy in soybean meal, replacing corn, or is it an amino acid response? Is it a response due to the calorie lysine ratio of the low soybean meal-based diets going to the high soybean meal-based diets? Is it an amino acid response? Take-home message, we're conducting further research. Jamil's doing a great job on the project, and we're looking at other options to see if it's an energy response or if it's a calorie lysine ratio response. And so again, growing pigs utilize high levels of soybean meal very effectively. Why the improvement in average daily gain and feed efficiency? Again, maybe it's a net energy level. We valued soybean meal net energy as at 100% of that is corn, based on some of Anike's data, some of the earlier data that we've been involved in. And so again, Jamil's working trials with late finishing pigs. This was a 80 to 140 pound pig. Jamil's looking at the 220 to market weight pig to see if we see the same response. Lastly, I want to talk about DDGs and a study that we conducted, Michaela Spindler, as part of her master's program, looking at DDGs withdrawal and tryptophan to lysine ratio on growth performance of finishing pigs. And so to set things up, there were 7 treatments, about 6,000 pigs, and the first 3 treatments were a DDG withdrawal strategy, feeding 30% DDGs up until about 220 pounds of market weight, and then taking out all the DDGs, what we refer to as a withdrawal strategy. The diets 4 through 7, they looked at increasing tryptophan to lysine ratios in diets with constant levels of DDGs. And so we've got the first 3 diets, corn, soy, formulated to a lysine to tryptophan ratio of 19%, fed all the way through. Then we had 19% tryptophan to lysine ratio in 30% DDGs up till about 220, 230 pounds, then switching to corn, soy, or the same program, except instead of having a 19% tryptophan to lysine ratio, bumping that up to 25%. And then we had the 4 levels of increasing levels of tryptophan in diets that had 30% DDGs all the way through the 4 phases. So the first 3 diets in red, looking at a withdrawal strategy, the last 4 diets in green, looking at tryptophan to lysine ratio. And as we look at overall average daily gain, first of all, our control pigs with no DDGs did good, but the other treatments where we had the DDG withdrawal did just as well. And so again, taking into account taking out DDGs in that very last phase has an improvement in terms of average daily gain. Increasing tryptophan to lysine ratio, we saw a linear increase in terms of performance, pretty much the biggest bump from 16 to 19%, a littler bump when we went up to 25% tryptophan to lysine ratio, but the biggest change when we increased to 19%. Overall feed efficiency, our pigs fed the corn soy diets had the best, the withdrawal diets kind of intermediate, and then as we increased the tryptophan to lysine ratio, again we saw a linear improvement in terms of improved feed efficiency, all the way up to 25% tryptophan to lysine ratio in a DDG-based feeding program from about 80 pounds on to market weight. Iodine value, again, as you'd expect, very high when we feed DDGs all the way through the market phase. The market phase, intermediate when we withdraw the diet, the last phase, and then again compared to a corn soy diet. And so again, depending upon where the cutoff is, which plant you're marketing to, a withdrawal period would very likely help things out in terms of meeting iodine value standards. And so to summarize, certainly the corn, soybean meal-based diets at 19% tryptophan lysine ratio were 2 pounds heavier than the DDGs-based diet at 19% tryptophan to lysine ratio. But again, it appears that we may have higher tryptophan requirements than what we've been looking at in the past. And looking at a 19% tryptophan to lysine ratio. And then lastly, iodine value, the DDGs diets, the worst, intermediate with withdrawal, and the best with corn soy diets. And so I think that wraps things up for me.